What is your favorite book of all time? Surprised nobody has mentioned the Brothers Karamazov. It goes through and attempts to answer the world's greatest questions about God, love, death, man, and country, all while telling a damn fine murder mystery. I've said this before, but knowing about Dostoevsky's life really adds a lot of poignancy to the novel. For instance, he died less than 6 months after finishing Brothers K. This means that not only is one of the most insightful novels of all time, but in it, the author is confronting all of these topics himself as he is dying. You can see him debate these great questions through the guise of the pure intellectual, Ivan, the pure spiritualist, Alyosha, and the pure sensualist, Dmitri. I cannot speak enough good about this novel. Edit. For those that don't know, Ivan, Alyosha, and Dmitri are the 3 brothers Karamazov. I'm really into Lonesome Dove. Just a wonderful, sprawling, epic western with rich characters and an interesting story. My favorite book of all time. My favorite fictional character of all time is Augustus McCrae. I normally am not one to laugh at a book or feel sad when there is a sad part, but this book really had me feeling a range of emotions. Great author and best book I have ever read. Not just one book, but a series. The Discworld series by Sir Terry Pratchett. I began with WYRD Sisters, and it had me hooked right away. It's fantasy mixed with wit and brilliance. The characters are so creative, and the Discworld has given me so many things the real world has not. It made growing up much easier. It was my safe place. I always recommend Pratchett. East of Eden. To date, no other book I've read has had such a profound effect on the way I view the world and the people in it. It's also the only book that I think about still probably every day. It's always refreshing to see someone else adores this book. It's also my all-time favorite. It gave me an entirely different views on a variety of things that affect me each and every day. Beautifully written, incredible message, and great plot. Definitely Steinbeck's magnum opus. I'm going with The Short History of Nearly Everything by Bill Bryson. It's entertaining and it's very informative, and explains concepts ranging from quantum mechanics to botany, but in a way that's easy to understand and never forgets the human factor behind the people that discover these things. The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien, short stories about a troop of U.S. soldiers in the Vietnam War. I love the way he humanizes the characters so well, and the very nonchalant, almost beautiful way in which he describes the atrocities of war. Surreal kind of style that really makes you think about what you're reading. My favorite from the book is How to Tell a True War Story. Catch-22 by Joseph Heller. When I first read it, I realized just how powerful satire is as a medium, something that I had always dismissed in the past as being too blunt. Even when I first read it, I thought the pacing and writing in the beginning was hard to get through, another thing that I dismissed as bad writing, but have come to realize the necessity of it. I love how the characters are relatively the same throughout the book, except for a few, and instead of the characters developing, the story does. By the end of the book you're left with a completely different view of all of the characters in a manner that completes the overall satire contained in the novel. I can hardly put it into words how just the writing and story has been very eye-opening for me. I'm sure there are people a lot smarter than me who could explain. The Hobbit. Because I love the imagery and the story of someone ordinary becoming extraordinary. The Sirens of Titan by Kurt Vonnegut. I read the whole book during an awful hangover and it changed my entire way of thinking. The Stranger by Albert Camus. I love the pacing of the story. It reads like a slow burn. As of right now, The Book Thief. The fact that it's narrated by Death combined with the lovable characters, as well as the setting being around World War II, really make the book amazing. Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. I recently got a quote from that book tattooed on my arm. Whenever people ask me what the tattoo is from, or why Lolita is my favorite book, given its reputation, I generally explain it to them like this. The first thing I fell in love with about Lolita was the prose. I found myself audibly gasping at how beautifully some of the sentences are written. Nabokov's language is full of puns and cheeky humor, and poignance describing Humbert's time before, during and after Lolita. Then, the story itself is both overwhelmingly comic and tragic. I always tell people it is a love story, not a sex story, and that's exactly what makes it so difficult to explain. It is a love story, but it's twisted, dark and sinister. It's not romantic, it's an obsessive lust disguised as love, the only thing a pentapod monster like Humbert knows. The psychology, thought process, and emotions behind both Humbert and Dolly are fascinating. Sabriel by Garth Nix, though all of the Abhorsen books are amazing. The books are a good mix of magic, adventure, and horror with just a touch of romance. The way Garth Nix writes allows me to see his stories as if I'm actually watching the events unfold and not just merely reading them. I really can't do the book justice describing it here, so I'll just stop rambling. Sabriel has been my favorite book since I first read it 8 years ago, and I can't remember how many times I've reread it since then. Shgun, by James Clavell. It's a story about an English sailor that gets lost at sea and ends up in Japan. After getting a good portion of his crew boiled to death on a Cottatron by a sadistic feudal lord, he starts learning their customs and traditions. It's funny, sad, clever, and exciting, and contemplative, and just a dozen kinds of awesome. It's also a huge book, but I promise you, when you get a quarter of the way through, you'll start getting sad that it'll eventually end. But the end is just about the best part of the book. When you finish it, I promise, you will have tears streaming from your eyes and love for the characters you're leaving behind. Also in this vein, The Physician, by Noah Gordon. It's about a kid who's adopted by a barber surgeon in olden times after his parents die. After the barber dies, he travels the world trying to find better ways to cure the sick. His search leads him to Persia, where people can actually open corpses and look inside, and it's not an awful sin. And thus where there is actual medicine being created and taught. The book has a minor supernatural element in that the protagonist can sense when someone is going to die by touching them, but it's really less important than you'd think. This book is shockingly well written. It has a sense of pace like very few books I've ever read, and I've read 1 to 2 every week for many years. Neuromancer by William Gibson. The World According to Garp. It was probably the first grown-up book I read as a freshman in high school. I had no idea how much more could go into a book than romance and teen angst. Made me want to read everything by Irving, and then everything ever written. Still working on the second part. I have never so easily become attached to characters as the ones in Mistborn by Brian Sanderson. 3 700-page books read in under a week. Very stimulating writing for well-read youths. I would still recommend them to everyone. For me, it's definitely Where the Red Fern Grows by Wilson Rawls. I was given this book by my sister when I was in 3rd grade to read. I loved reading a lot even back then. She had just gone into 7th grade and still had it from when she had read it in 6th. At the time, it was probably a few years old already, and at 24 I still have it today. I've read this book so many times the pages are yellowed and bent. Some have fallen out and are loose, and the front cover is torn and also loose off. This book always resonated with me so much, not only because it's a heart-wrenching tale of the love between a boy and his dogs, but also because it's a testament to perseverance, dedication, and old-time familial values. I reread this at least once a year, and I know it will never get old for me. I absolutely cry every single time I get to the end of the book, and I don't think that will ever change. Of all the books I've ever read or will read someday, I know that nothing will ever come close to topping it for me. The Giver by Lois Lowry. I'm surprised no one mentioned this at all. It's a dystopian novel on a world without colors. People are each assigned a job, there are birth mothers, storytellers, etc.